Hey there, Agile Frijoles, and welcome to another episode of Agile Bytes, the podcast sponsored by Integrity Inspired Solutions, where we build software in an agile manner day in and day out. Folks, can you believe we've been doing this a year? It's true. This is our full year of Agile Bytes episodes, and I just want to say thank you to the people who listen regularly. Thank you to the people who listen occasionally when you find a topic that's interesting to you. The rest of you guys, forget you, right? You're not listening to this either, so I guess you don't care. But anyway, thank you so much for people who have listened, who have supported us, who've sent encouragement, who've been fans, and who have given us input on what they would like to see or hear from Agile Bytes. And I would like to reiterate that this time around as well. If there's a topic we haven't hit that you would like us to talk about, or something that we're not doing that you would like to see, definitely let us know. Send me an email, go to Integrity Inspired's website, fill out the form, or hit me up on LinkedIn. Well, this episode, I want to talk about something that is a fairly prevalent idea in our field, and I've seen it a lot recently, or maybe I've just noticed it a lot more recently. And that is the idea that Scrum is a good way to start a team or an organization out in their Agile journey. It's, in fact, a very popular analogy people use for this is that Scrum is kind of like training wheels, and so it kind of gets you going, kind of gets you used to bicycles, but in the long run, you're going to take the training wheels off and you're going to ride on your own. And there's this idea that Scrum is really good for this. It's good. It's a good introduction to agility. It's a good way to start. It's a good way to get rolling. And then once you kind of get used to Scrum for a while, then you can start like dropping things off, or pick something else or whatever, but it's a good introduction to agility. But interestingly, as many times as I've seen people say something like this, we also know that it's fairly common for teams to really struggle with Scrum a lot, actually. And if you are part of any kind of public discussions around agility and Scrum for any length of time, you will come to realize very quickly that there are far more teams that are not doing well with Scrum than there are teams that are doing well with Scrum. No, I don't have a data set to share with you. I don't even know if someone has done a study on this. So definitely, qualifier, hashtag anecdotes are not data, et cetera, et cetera. But seriously, you would have to have some serious blinders on not to see this as a phenomenon. Hop onto Reddit, see what people think about Scrum. Hop on LinkedIn, see what developers are saying about their experience with Scrum. And watch Scrum masters and Agile coaches talk about Scrum. And you will see time and time again, somebody will say something like, well, I don't like Scrum because XYZ. And inevitably, someone will come along and say, oh, you're doing Scrum wrong. And they're not incorrect when they say that. In fact, I would say that most of the time that I see someone saying, I hate Scrum because of XYZ, it really does come down to them doing something wrong or doing things that maybe aren't officially part of Scrum, but somebody told them that they were, or they used to be part of Scrum in some version of the Scrum guide, and now they've been written out or whatever. That kind of thing happens a lot. But nevertheless, that raises the question, if so many people are doing it wrong, or so many people are struggling with it, even if it's a good framework, is it a good beginner framework? Is it a good place for someone to start their Agile journey when there is just an overwhelming amount of teams that are either A, flat out doing it wrong, or B, are doing it kind of right, but still really struggling? I would say that generally speaking, that's a pretty good indicator that it's not necessarily a great beginner framework or a great way to start a team or an organization when we're talking about agility. It seems really difficult for people to do successfully. But I do want to say, on the other hand, that I think most of the reasons that teams struggle with Scrum is not because Scrum is bad or even that Scrum is that difficult. There's a popular saying that goes around that Scrum is easy to learn but difficult to master. I disagree with this. I think Scrum is easy. I think it's easy to do. I think it's easy to master. I think it's actually extremely easy. But it's only easy if the kind of work that you're doing is a good fit for Scrum. And that's what I really want to focus on today, because I think a lot of teams and organizations have been sold a bill of goods that Scrum is a default or a generic Agile framework among many, and it can just be used for any software development. Like if you're doing software development, you can't go wrong with Scrum. Or like Sam Adams, what's their tagline? Sam Adams, always a good decision. That's kind of how Scrum is marketed. Scrum, always a good decision. By the way, I am not sponsored by Sam Adams, but Sam Adams, if you're listening to this, hit me up. But is Scrum always a good decision? It's kind of billed this way. It's like if you're a software team and you want to be agile, Scrum is a way for you to go. I'm going to push back on this. I don't think of Scrum as a generically agile framework. I don't think of it as something that every software development team could benefit from. In fact, I don't have problems with Scrum per se, but I think way more teams are doing Scrum than should be doing Scrum. And I think this accounts for quite a bit of the struggles and the failure rates, or the quote unquote doing Scrum wrong, that we see a lot of teams doing. So in order to really wrap our arms around this, I want to talk a little bit about Scrum's origin story, the origin myth, the creation myth of Scrum. So Scrum actually starts in a paper called the New Product Development Game. In this paper that was published in the Harvard Business Review, they look at several industries that are very competitive in the product world. And these industries are things like cameras and photocopiers and cars. Something that a lot of people don't know about Scrum is its origins are in manufacturing. And you will hear people talk about this like, well, Kanban started in manufacturing, they just had to adapt it for software development. But Scrum was designed for software development. That is not accurate. Scrum was designed for manufacturing. And what you see in what is now formally called Scrum is an adaptation of the principles laid out in the New Product Development Game to software development by Schwaber and Sutherland. And so Scrum, or at least the foundational ideas of it, actually has its roots in manufacturing. But it was a specific scenario in manufacturing. And that scenario is, how do you compete in a very competitive marketplace where you are having to add innovative features that your competitors don't have, but you don't know for sure what features are really going to capture the market? You don't know for sure what they're going to like or not. Now, of course, you're doing market research, right? It's not like, Canon photocopiers is just randomly sticking on like a drink dispenser or something. They're not just throwing all kinds of things into their photocopiers and seeing what sticks. There's market research, they're getting feedback, they're doing all those things. But at the same time, you're just not going to know. You're not going to know for sure. And in manufacturing, this is really critical, because if I make a bunch of photocopiers that have some feature that very few people care about, that's a huge amount of lost money. So not only do I need a way to come up with innovative features to differentiate my product from all their competitors, I also need to produce it in a way that I'm not losing a ton of money, that I'm not overcommitting to this feature set. I'm not producing millions and millions of units only to discover that nobody wants this feature. I have to have a design to production model that allows me to recover quickly if it turns out we're going down the wrong road. And in order to have a manufacturing process that looks like that, then I have to have a manufacturing process where there is a lot of tight overlap and feedback loops between the design, the build, the shipping, the sales. All of these people have to be kind of glommed on together. There's a lot of overlap and collaboration between these groups of people instead of a lot of isolation as we find in traditional manufacturing. And this is the idea of the paper, is they're saying manufacturing companies that compete in a world where you are having to come up with innovative features, but you don't want to overcommit to those features and lose a ton of money. You have to be able to recover quickly. What does your production have to look like? And that's where Scrum comes from. And in the paper, they talk about it. They talk about rugby, and they say in rugby, everyone pulls together and you have a scrum and you're moving the ball down the field. And that's what we're talking about. That's what we're calling this thing. And they talk about the way a manufacturing line would have to look that is very collaborative, has short feedback loops, and where groups that are traditionally siloed are now overlapping and talking and working more closely together so they can be more quickly responsive to delivery. And then you put your product out in the market. The market tells you if it likes it or not. And if it does, then you increase production or you keep coming up with features along that line, or the market doesn't like it. And you're very able to quickly pivot into another feature set that you might like. So, I'm making cameras that autofocus, or I'm making photocopiers that allow me to photocopy photos onto photo quality paper. What are the things that people might care about that might differentiate your camera or your photocopier or your car from your competitors? This is the world that created Scrum. Okay. Now, if you have been listening carefully to my description of this particular method of manufacturing, you probably heard some things that are very familiar to you when we think about Scrum applied to software development. Things like collaboration, breaking down the silos, short feedback loops, being focused on what the customer tells us, inspecting and adapting, and taking that market feedback and making changes, right? These are all things we talk about when we talk about Scrum. But what people aren't doing enough of, in my opinion, is taking seriously the idea that these are the sets of product conditions that made Scrum a good and competitively advantageous idea. Okay. A, it's a competitive market, possibly glutted with products similar to ours. B, we have to come up with differentiating features that we have a pretty good idea people will like, but we don't know for sure. C, if it turns out the market doesn't like that feature set, we have to be able to pivot quickly with a minimal loss of time and money, resources, supplies, et cetera, and pursue a different set of features that we think the market will like. These are the conditions in which Scrum is easy. Scrum was built to fit that. So I ask you, in terms of your software development situation, how much does it look like that? Are you in an environment where you are creating software that is entering into a market that is very competitive for the kind of software you're building, where you are having to differentiate yourself with particular features, innovative features that you have a pretty good idea the market might like, but you don't know. And if it turns out that your market doesn't like it, you're going to pivot away from that into a different set of features, or you're going to get confirmation that that's what they want, and you're going to keep building the product along those lines. In other words, are you fairly frequently needing to adjust your product in response to market feedback as a competitive advantage? The closer you are to that situation, the better Scrum is going to work for you. The further away you are from that situation, the more difficult Scrum will become. And I would offer that there are far more software development teams in a situation that is not like what Scrum was designed for. Many software development teams are building software for internal use, line of business applications, where sure, there's some uncertainty involved. There's uncertainty in virtually every software project. But what you're not doing is entering into a highly exploratory, tentative product development mechanism where you are getting a feature out the door, seeing if the market likes it, and if they don't, pivoting into a different set of features. Okay, the product idea is not morphing in this way, right? Where depending on the feedback we get back from the market, whatever the market means in your context, we're going to be adopting a completely different feature set, or we're going to be going down a completely different road. If that's not you, if you're on a software team where you pretty much know what's going into the software, at least at a high level, and that's what you're going to get out the door, and sure, some things are going to change, and you're going to get some feedback that's going to affect the product, but the feedback is going to be more along things like the UI, how people want things to be laid out, whether the UX they have with your screen is a good one or not. Like, that's the kind of feedback you're getting. You're getting feedback about priorities maybe, but 80% of what you think is going into the software today is pretty much what's going into the software. Maybe you even have a backlog that has, more than 20 or 30 things in it. You've got like a few months worth of work at least, maybe even more kind of lined up. And the odds are pretty decent that you're going to do most of those things. I think a lot of software teams are in that situation, and Scrum was just not built for that situation. And when you are trying to take the framework of Scrum and put it on top of work where you are not stopping to pivot the product in meaningful ways, it's just going to be a struggle. Your work is just not a great fit for Scrum. It's just not your best choice. And it's not a good beginner framework for that reason. It might be a good beginner framework, again, if you closely fit the profile, right? We're building software in a market that's very competitive, and we need to be market responsive. We don't know for sure that we're building the right thing, and we're going to make a lot of tentative experiments, and ultimately the product is going to be forged in the fires of the market and what the market dictates to us. It's not going to be driven by a set of functionality we know we need, right? Or a set of business capabilities we know that this department needs or whatever. It's going to be driven by what the market does and doesn't find palatable. And we're competing with a lot of other products that are trying to do the same thing. If that's not your situation, Scrum is going to be hard. It's going to be difficult because your work just doesn't fit that. And your team is always going to be wanting to shift the models that are closer to the work you're actually doing, which may mean getting away from Scrum. Now, is it true that sometimes teams shift away from Scrum or they don't like Scrum because Scrum challenges things that need to be challenged? Sure, that's true sometimes. Or, the reason Scrum is hard is because it's highlighting areas of your organization that are still working in kind of an unresponsive command and control, big batch, big upfront planning, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, absolutely. That can be a reason that Scrum is hard. And it is possible that by working through those things, your organization will improve. But it's also quite possible that the reason Scrum is hard is because you never should have been doing it to begin with. Somebody came along and told you, hey, you want to be more agile? Well, you might as well get going with Scrum. And this is just not the case. It's sort of like saying, oh, you want to attach planks of wood to other planks of wood? Well, you better get started with screwdrivers. Well, maybe. If you are screwing screws, then yeah, screwdrivers are a great way to get started with that. If you're hammering nails, well, hammering nails in with screwdrivers is better than using your hand, I guess, which is what a lot of software teams start out doing with waterfall or chaos, right? So maybe Scrum is an improvement in that regard, but it's still not the best thing you could have selected. So if you're going to adopt Scrum, I would say you need to ask yourself a few things to decide, is Scrum even a good decision? One is Scrum a good fit for the kind of product you are developing? Because it's the state of the product in the market that determine whether Scrum is going to really help you or not. And if you are developing software that it's like, yeah, some things are going to change about this for sure. Every project is that way. Or, yeah, there's some things we don't know about this. Yeah, every project is that way. Or we're going to get a lot of user feedback on whether they like the screens and that's really going to control our layout and stuff. Yeah, every software project is like that. But if you're in a position where you pretty much know most of the things that are going into the software and you just need to crank those things out, the Scrum has a lot of unnecessary cruft and it's going to slow you down and it's going to cause you a lot of frustration. So you need to ask yourself, is Scrum a good fit for this product? And that can even vary on a product to product basis. You may in your organization have some products where that is the case while other products are not. And that'll dictate whether Scrum is a good fit or not. And in order to really do this, you need to have somebody in your organization who really understands Scrum at a deeply theoretical level. What are all these things supposed to accomplish? What are all these pieces of the framework supposed to accomplish? And what will these principles look like in our specific product development context? Folks, I'm sorry, this is not something you're going to learn after a 2-day Scrum Master certification class. That's something that only comes from in-depth experience with Scrum, probably not just in your organization, but in other organizations as well. That doesn't mean you can't have Scrum Masters fresh out of certification. You absolutely can. But when you're trying to decide if Scrum is right for you, you need somebody like that. You need somebody who really understands the internal workings of Scrum and why the different pieces of the framework accomplish what they accomplish, so that they can look at your organization and your work and say, yes, this is a great fit here. No, it isn't a great fit here. So is Scrum a good place for teams to begin their journey to agility? I would say in most circumstances, it really isn't. A lot of times just some light workflow management kind of thing, like I like Kanban, obviously, or even just saying, hey, let's get more feedback as we go and see what that looks like. Or let's start having self-improvement meetings on a regular cadence and seeing what that looks like. Just getting back to basic Agile principles and just coming up with experiments for yourself along those principles. Just see what that looks like. Don't even worry about Scrum or Kanban or any of that stuff. Just get going. I think any of those things might be a good or even better starting point for you than just starting out with Scrum. I would say overall, Scrum is probably not for beginners. And so before you take it on, just take a good long look at if it really fits your product or not. Thanks everyone for listening to Agile Bites. Agile does sometimes bite, but we don't think it always has to. If you enjoyed what you heard today, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you happen to be using. And if you can, leave us a comment because we'd love to hear your feedback. What things would you like to hear about? What things did you hear that were valuable to you today? You can also head over to integrityinspired.com to sign up to our email list. But that's all for today, folks. We'll see you next time.